And we're going to talk about several topics. First, we're going to talk about how clean our water is based on several different monitoring programs that are ongoing at MUB. And then most of the presentation is going to focus on source water protection planning. And when we say source water, we mean the water that MUB withdraws from on the Mon River and on Coven Creek to create the water that you drink and bathe and cook with. And then the final portion of the presentation will be some brand new information about proposed construction and possible impacts on rates that the utility customers pay related to improving the water and sewer service. And again, we hope to reserve half the time for a community dialogue. Because of the new infrastructure projects and the possible impacts on rates, MUB has a whole series of meetings scheduled. So this is just one of those. So you should have that list in your handout with all the slides. So hopefully you might be able to attend others or talk to your friends and neighbors and have them attend as well. So the first speaker from MUB is Greg Shelito, who's going to give us an update on water quality. Thank you.
Okay, we talk about water quality. Water quality is kind of a nebulous term. It's more of a descriptor. It doesn't really tell you anything. It can be good or it can be bad. All right, so we're going to have to break that down just a little bit more. And water quality is going to mean different things to different people because it's a little bit subjective. It depends on your end use, what you want to use it for. If you just want to water your lawn, you may have good quality water in a stream. That doesn't mean it's a good quality water for you to drink. Okay. I've handed out, and there's some more back there, our 2014 Consumer Confidence Report. Okay, this primarily is about the finished water that we have from our treatment process. We're going to focus a little bit more tonight on our raw water sources, and that dovetails in with the Source Water Protection Plan. There is a table on page 6, I'll show it to you in a slide here in a minute, that kind of gives you a breakdown of a lot of the common constituents that we look for in our raw water as to determine what kind of quality water we have to deal with and treat. Okay. The Utility Board has 2 raw water sources. The main one is the Mon River that flows through the center of town there, right past the treatment plant. We also have a secondary source. That's the Coven Creek Reservoir. That's up in White Park. That comes from the Coven Creek watershed. Both sources are relatively good as far as a source water for us. Because of the limited capacity and the amount of water in the Coven Creek side of things, we primarily draw from the Mon. Now let me give you just a little breakdown of how we did that last year. For 2014, that's the data I'm going to speak with. That's the most current year I have to work with right now. We processed over 4 billion gallons of water. That's a heck of a lot of water to process and put out into the system for our drinking water system. That breaks down to about 11 million gallons per day. 80% of that we actually drew from the Mon River. Okay, the remaining 20% we took from Coven Creek. All right, this is the table I was referring to. It is in the Consumer Confidence Report. It's on page 6. Okay, these are chemical constituents that we've done the analysis for the raw water source, the Mon River and our Coven Creek Reservoir. I don't expect you to take a lot from this. Peruse it later on. It's just here to give you a detailed look at a bunch of the parameters that we look at as when we're trying to establish, what kind of water we're dealing with. Of particular importance, and maybe a little more common to people, if you look at the bottom 2, the pH and turbidity. The Mon is about a 7. Coven Creek is just a little bit less than that. Very nice waters to deal with as far as treating it for drinking water sources. And if we look at the average on the turbidities, both are relatively low. Okay, so although the Mon does get turbulent and it does look a lot of brown sometimes because of the increased rainfall and all that, overall it is a very clean source as far as the amount of sediments that we get. Okay. I'm just going to breeze through several examples of some of the things that we've done, some other programs. If you remember back in 2009, there was a big to-do about a lot of the total dissolved solids that was found in the Mon River and then flowing up into Pennsylvania. We started a program back in 2009, and we've been monitoring the total dissolved solids in our raw water source in the Mon River up to current date. We look at actually what we draw from the river, that's our black line there, and then what we put out. We don't have very much effect in treating total dissolved solids, so what we find in the Mon River, we pretty much end up passing through to our customers on the drinking water side. Another program that we look at the amount of bromine or bromide that we find in our raw water. This is a concern for us because that is a halogen that can react with the chlorine that we put in for disinfection. And that, along with some total naturally occurring carbons in the water, will form what they call THMs, the trihalomethanes. We're regulated underneath that very strictly down to parts per billion levels. So the amount that we find out there can be significant to us. We've been monitoring that since 2011 on a weekly basis also. We find very little of it out there. The little bits of spikes that we do and we have seen, okay, those are pretty much related to events where someone has in the past been treating brine water from some of the gas well operations. Okay, treatment plants on the wastewater side normally do not treat for the TDS very well, so it's almost a pass-through. That's why that practice has been stopped in the wastewater industry. We also look at some of the raw water stuff on a real-time basis. We have several streaming monitors that monitor the incoming water as we take it into the treatment plant. This is just a snapshot of like the last week's data. We look at conductivity, or basically a measure of how much dissolved material is in there. The more dissolved material, the higher the conductivity will be. We monitor the pH and temperature. We also have a streaming device now online that we just put on about 6 months ago where we can look at our total organic carbon loads coming in.
Do you have the same data for Coven Creek?
Not as of yet. Okay, we do have the instrumentation in place. We're waiting for it to be kind of programmed up and then brought into our computer system. But yes, we will have that capability within the next month. So we actually look on some real-time data that's streaming through all the time. We put upper and lower bounds on some of these. If the pH gets too high, we will get an automatic alarm that will come through to notify the operator that something is wrong. So we look at quite a few things. As part of the program, we do look at our source water, and the initial data that you saw in here is just from some grab samples of our source water. With the advent of everything that's going on in our source water protection program, and we'll get into a little bit more when we start talking about it, we have developed a program where we're now actually going up into a large portion of our watershed system where we drain the water from. This point right here, that's where the active plant is, our treatment plant. So we actually have 14 more data sites now that we're looking up into our watershed and going out there at least quarterly and sampling these sites for the different constituents. Okay, this is important, not that we're going to catch something just when we're sampling it, we might, but what this is doing is actually giving us a long-term database that we can look at, so we can look at what natural trends are happening out there. We can see what's happening on a seasonal basis. And this is just an example of what we've already sampled on the 4 quarters there. But this delineates all the sites going up on the Mon River. This is conductivity. And you can see pretty much from the beginning of our sites that we're looking at it all the way down through, okay, pretty consistent. We have a little anomaly that we're looking at down here. This is readily explainable. This is during the fall, very low flows. So what's coming into the Mon is not really being diluted. So we're seeing an increase in the amount of solid concentration just because there is not that much flow coming down to dilute it. So that's an example of a seasonal trend that we're going to be seeing. And as we develop this data over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we'll start to get a real good database as to what's happening out in our drainage system with our tributaries. There's also a bunch of other stuff we do. I'm not going to touch on all of it, but one thing that is significant We have some Marcellus gas wells in the Morgantown Industrial Park. They actually reside almost right across the river from our water plant intake. Drilling and fracking operations started and have been going on since May of 2011. That's when they initially drilled the wells and fracked them. That period was pretty much very short, for about 4 or 5 months. We did some very intensive sampling. And since then, we've kind of done it every month, every 4 months, every 6 months, just to monitor the progress of what's going on there, to make sure none of those activities has had an effect on our drinking water. Results to date, we've been very good with that. We have not found anything from those type of activities that has had an effect on our water supply. All right. There's some new activity going on there, some new wells. 3 of them have been drilled up on that pad. We're getting ready to frack, and I think, Doug, you told me that they're going to be starting tomorrow or Saturday, somewhere in that time. Again, we'll step up our monitoring activities, and we're going to be out there at least weekly taking additional samples of the river right there at our intake, and then further on up as a comparison to see if there is any effects even from this operation.
I don't know if it's too early to bring it up, but how much monitoring, if any, and how extensive do you do on Deckers Creek?
We don't do anything on Deckers Creek. Deckers Creek really has no effect on our water supply. It actually enters the Mon River well below our intake. So from a drinking water standard perspective, we do not do much monitoring on Deckers Creek whatsoever.
Is there anyone that does, as far as continuing or trying to continue to make it more of a recreational sort of
Evan, maybe you can
Yes.
address that a little bit.
There's several people here from Friends of Deckers Creek who have monitoring programs, and I would suggest you talk to them after the presentation. They're seated right here.
Thank you.
The link down here links to our website. We actually make all this data public, so anyone who would like to look at the past water quality data that we've collected on the river, particularly just with this project, that link will take you right to it. It's quite extensive.
When you say the fracking to commence this week, is that current
Yep.
now, of this week?
That's this week,
Okay,
yes.
I think that this was like the most slappier one. Yeah,
No,
thank you.
no, I made the slide yesterday.
Yeah.
All right. That's just a very brief overview of some of our monitoring activities that we're looking at with the source water. Just a real quick look into the source water protection plan as far as monitoring upstream. We'll get a little more into that when we start talking about the program. Thank you.
So now with that background, we know that we're lucky here in Morgantown to have clean, raw water supplies. But clean raw water supplies can be fragile, and we learned that back in 2014 when 300,000 people lost their drinking water supply due to a chemical leak in the Charleston area. And it's been almost 2 years now. One sort of silver lining out of that is that there was some activity in the legislature who were personally impacted by the leak. And a bill was passed in 2014, it was Senate Bill 373, that was a very large bill that had a lot in it, but among the most important parts of it were this first requirement here for water utilities across the state, like Mo, to update their source water protection plans. So that's what we'll be talking about mostly today. Also for utilities to update their inventory of potential contaminant sources. And we'll be talking about that as well. That's part of the planning process. And separate, there was an entirely new law that regulated above ground storage tanks, because it was an above ground storage tank that leaked that caused this problem in Charleston. A year later, so now we're in January 2015, the legislature took some additional action. This was Senate Bill 423, where they made some significant changes to the above ground storage tank act. Among them, there's many fewer tanks that are now regulated as compared to when the original bill passed. But the good news from Senate Bill 423 is it had virtually no impact on the requirements for utilities to update their source water protection plans. So all across the state, there's about 120 utilities that are now doing what MUB has been doing. Greg showed a map that showed some of the monitoring locations in the watershed, and even the furthest ones that he showed are probably up around here. So Morgantown is up here. This red area is our zone of critical concern, which is the area that drains to the water intake within 5 hours. So that's the most important area to protect. But this gray area is the entire watershed, where if it rains anywhere in this gray area, that water will eventually make it to our intake. So in terms of minimizing the risks upstream from MUB's intakes, it's a big task because it's a large part of the state of West Virginia. This is a more detailed map of that area. It includes a couple of larger cities, Fairmount and Clarksburg. These yellow areas are zones of critical concern for other water utilities. So there's a lot of utilities that draw their water from the Mon River Basin. And again, these are the special areas up here that are closest to the intake. It includes parts of 11 counties, big area. Then zooming up to the water treatment plant. So we have Morgantown here and the water treatment plant here. And again, we're looking at these special zones. The red area is the zone of critical concern for the Mon River. So that's an area where water or chemical leaks or anything that reaches the water will get to the intake within 5 hours. And the green area is the zone of critical concern for the Coven Creek intake. And then we have a second area, which is this gray one, which is called the zone of peripheral concern. And that's related to how the above-ground storage tanks are regulated. And that's a travel time of 5 to 10 hours to get to the intake. MUB was moving on source water protection even before the chemical leak. They put out an RFP that Downstream Strategies, among other people, among other companies, responded to. We were eventually chosen to do the work. Senate Bill 373 has some very specific requirements, so we've been working through those specific requirements. The plan itself is almost entirely finished now. But one thing that MUB's doing is going above and beyond the requirements of Senate Bill 373 in several ways, and among those is a real commitment to not just write a plan once every 3 years and not do anything in between, but to have an ongoing program to try to minimize these risks into the future. So Senate Bill 373 has many specific requirements. These are the ones that we'll talk about in detail. The management plan is a plan to minimize the risk that contamination will occur. So you're looking up into the watershed and you're thinking about what types of steps the utility can take, local governments can take, organizations, the whole community. What can we all do together to manage those risks? The second element is an inventory of the potential significant contaminant sources within that special zone, the zone of critical concern, although MUB is going further than that and inventorying all the potential significant contaminant sources. The third and the fourth we'll touch on. If contamination were to occur, you're in a bit of a different world and you need to have done the proper planning for a contingency plan and a communications plan so that you don't have to make it up as you go along. Yes?
Where does, excuse me, where does the use of chemical fertilizers and herbicides fall into this critical zone and monitoring and everything?
Well, I think it would fall in some of those contaminants might be found in the field monitoring program. But generally those are not regulated activities. There's many other components of Senate Bill 373 that we're not going to talk about in detail today. There are a lot of engineering questions that are listed up here. So just so you know, this is a comprehensive plan in a lot of ways, and it's too much to talk about in a short presentation. So again, the key ones we're looking at are the management plan and the list of potential significant contaminant sources. This is how we minimize the risk of contamination from occurring in the first place. And then the contingency and the communications plans, which is what kicks in if contamination should occur. And the legislation was very clear in terms of the importance of involving the public. So we're really glad to have so many people interested in this issue. To help with all these aspects of the source water protection planning, we're also developing a GIS-based source water protection and response system. This includes maps of all the potential sources. It allows MUB to figure out which ones present the highest threats. And it also provides a platform for them to respond effectively if there is a spill in the watershed. So this is something that's the development has been ongoing for several months now, and it's nearing completion. So now let's just talk about the management plan, zero in on that a little bit. This is specifically what Senate Bill 373 requires. It identifies specific activities that will be pursued by the utility in cooperation with many other entities to protect the source water supply from contamination. And when we think about how to protect the source water supply from contamination, we think about how the Mon River watershed is a little bit different from Coven Creek. The Mon River watershed, as we saw on the map, it's large. It has a lot of developed areas. There's I-79 and I-68. There's a lot of existing potential significant contaminant sources. In fact, this is our most recent count of how many potential significant contaminant sources there are. And there's other categories that we're not showing here, but there's hundreds of permitted coal and non-coal sites. There's 342 active Marcellus wells. There's almost 12,000 above-ground storage tanks in that big area. So there are a lot of potential threats out there. And then within the zone of critical concern, obviously there's many fewer. Those are ones we need to pay particular attention to. And these are just to give you sort of a visual of what these potential contaminant sources look like. So there's oil and gas well permits across most of this huge area. Quite a lot of them. A lot of above ground storage tanks as well. NPDES permits, these are Clean Water Act permits that discharge into rivers and streams. Mining permits, and these are virtually all coal mines. And then this is just sort of a catch-all other category. That gives you a sense of how many potential contaminant sources there are across the whole watershed. And we have a few maps that zoom in. This is Fairmont, and this is Morgantown. And the blue area is the part of the watershed that drains directly into the Mon River. So it's a tributary of the Mon River. It's above Fairmont is where the West Fork and the Tiger Valley rivers come together to form the Mon River. So we're just focusing on the area downstream of that. And we have a series of maps. This shows the yellow circles are permitted coal sites, and the purple ones, like up here, those are permitted non-coal sites. We're being a little bit careful about not showing what's within the zone of critical concern due to some requirements in the law about restricted information. Here we're showing the conventional oil and gas wells.
Excuse me, Evan.
Purple ones. Yep.
On your previous slide, what were those large manila squares?
These here?
Yeah.
These are underground mining limits, so those are not features on the surface of the land, but those are areas that have been mined underground, which could discharge to the surface. Here we've got oil and gas wells. The purple ones are conventional, the brown ones are Marcellus, and overlaid on that are some above-ground storage, the above-ground storage tanks in the blue dots. Here we show some others. So just to give you a sense that there, even when we come close to the intakes, there are a lot of potential threats. Now, that doesn't mean that the stream or the river is polluted. We have data that shows it's nice and clean. But part of MUB doing a responsible job here is to try to manage these risks and try to do everything possible to minimize the risk that anything bad would happen. Here we're zooming into the area close to the treatment plant, and the shaded white areas are the zones of critical concern. This is the very beginning of the zone for the Mon River. This is the beginning of the zone for Cogan Creek. And the main point I wanted to make here is that this area here is the Morgantown Industrial Park. And like Greg said, it's very close to the treatment plant. And some of the industrial park is in the zone and some of it is out. And this is one reason why MUB is being prudent in creating inventories of these potential contaminant sources, not just within the zone, but also outside the zone. Because while the zone is important, it's not like everything outside of the zone does not present a threat. There can be threats from outside the zone of critical concern. We had a public meeting in May, and part of the feedback we got from that meeting from the public was how can you be asking us for feedback on your inventory of potential contaminant sources if you don't even tell us what the inventory is. So to help with that, we just yesterday made this link live. It's mub.org/above-ground storage tanks. And you can go there and pull up an interactive map of all of these potential contaminant sources that we just talked about, and it allows you to zoom in and you could click on them and see who the owner of the facility is and things like that. We're specifically leaving off the above-ground storage tanks, though, due to the restricted information requirements in the law. But what you can do is get counts of the above-ground storage tanks by owner, so you can know generally which above-ground storage tanks are on MUB's radar. So given that there are all these potential contaminant sources scattered around the watershed, what are we doing to minimize the risks? Well, first of all, we're inventorying them so we know where they are. Secondly, we've been looking at aerial photographs to make sure that we're not missing any. And at least close into Morgantown, we've been performing windshield surveys, driving around and making sure we don't find anything that's not already, that was not built when the aerial photographs were taken. We've been looking at Tier 2 forms where some of the largest quantities of the most toxic substances are reported. We've been researching the toxicity of the chemicals that we know are upstream of the intake, so that if something bad should happen, we would instantly have the best available information at our fingertips. We're looking at public notices when permits are up for renewal, and from time to time providing comments to the regulatory agencies about those permits. We're looking at inspection reports from the state regulatory agencies to get a sense of which ones, number one, which ones are being inspected, and then number two, of the ones that are being inspected, are there problems with those facilities? And then finally, we're communicating with those potential upstream threats to make sure that they know that they're located in a sensitive area, and to hopefully convince them to take all necessary steps to protect water quality. It's not just the stationary facilities that present a threat. There's also the risk of transportation accidents. Like I said, we've got the highways. I-68 crosses both zones. It crosses Cogan Creek, as a lot of people know. I-79 crosses the Mon River. There's barges that run on the Mon River. There's a train that runs along the Mon River, so those are all threats as well. So we're trying to take into account those threats as well.
Where in these threats, if any place, is there attention to the use and abuse of household chemicals? I mean, all along the river, there's developments and all these other big hardware store chemicals being used.
We're not inventorying those as specific points that are threats, but MUB does have programs in place to help collect household hazardous waste and to try to minimize the risks that they present. So we're trying to do public education so that people know that they're hazardous, and we're trying to make it easy to dispose of them properly.
Could you describe that collection process or schedule?
Does anybody know offhand from Mug what you're?
Well, so far it's been annually. We've had good response to that. We hope to increase that to semi-annual, but right now it's annual. We just conducted it about a month ago or so. I think we collected, Chris, was it about 18,000 pounds?
Actually, this year's probably about 16,000, we did almost 18 last year.
Generally, the budget for that single event runs in the range of $30,000 or so, $35,000 annually. We do have some partners that help us with that. Long County Solid Waste Authority, I think, participates in it. We think it's a very effective program. It's free to the public. We publicize it. We encourage people to bring their household hazardous waste out and allow us to provide the service of disposing of it for them properly.
You could also mention this marking of the storm drops with this, I don't know what it is it a sticker on the storm drops
Yeah,
reminding people not to pour household chemicals down?
Right. We have a stormwater inlet marking program, usually using volunteer labor, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever, come out
And some of the neighborhood associations also have.
we have medallions that'll identify those storm drops and provide a reminder that they do drain to the local waters and that hazardous materials should not be disposed of.
Evan, you mentioned you were following DEP to some extent. Are they pre-announcing when they are, when there are issues that are coming up? For example, Marcellus Wells. There was a time when they never told us.
Yeah, once they passed the Marcellus Shale law in 2011, that changed. And we do get public notices for the Marcellus wells.
And public hearings too, I said. Not yet.
You may be able to request one, but
Okay. All right.
doesn't
That's
typically happen. Yeah. So we've been talking about activities that we're focused on the Mon River watershed due to the unique nature of the Mon River watershed. It's big. There's a lot of potential threats there. We're also doing all of that in the Coben Creek watershed, but Coben Creek is a little bit different. It's a small watershed. It's mostly forested and agricultural. It's not very developed. This is what the watershed looks like. It's a little hard to see here, but it's this area here. So this is Morgantown. This is the White Park Reservoir up here. This is Grafton Road going south to Grafton. So as you're going south out of town, it's the watershed on your left, between Grafton Road and Kingwood Pike, which is on this side.
Hey Evan, on that map, can you point to where Coben Creek, where the intake is at Coben, as well as the intake on the Mon?
Well, I can't point to any intakes, but I can tell you where the reservoir is. There's the White Park Reservoir is up here.
Okay.
And the water treatment plant is very close to the reservoir on the river.
You can't point to them because you can't identify where they are by law.
Yes, it is.
That's a Homeland Security thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's some additional actions that MUB is considering taking in the Coben Creek watershed. Some additional education and outreach to people who live there. But there's also the consideration, given that there's a reservoir there, and as we'll hear in just a few minutes, there's a proposal for a new, larger reservoir there. The best way to make sure that the water in those reservoirs is clean is to try to preserve the land above it. Make sure no freedom industry gets sited above that reservoir, for example. And one way to do that is to purchase land if there's willing sellers, or to negotiate conservation easements if there's a willing grantor of that easement. So this is something that MUB is giving strong consideration to, and it's also something that people in the community can play an important role in. And we're also researching incentive programs and funding opportunities that could help keep Coben Creek clean. So that was all about the management plan. I'm just going to quickly say a couple words about the contingency and communication plans. This is the requirement from Senate Bill 373. It's a document that explains the planned response to contamination of the water supply. Among other things, we need to quickly identify if there's an emergency, initiate effective response actions, step-by-step actions that MUB and other partners take, and a communications plan that goes along with it. So we have worked with MUB and with MECA 911 and the health department and other partners to develop a contingency plan. That's part of what is virtually done now, the broader source water protection plan. And linked to that is the communication plan. So this is a communication plan in the case of an emergency. Who do you need to communicate with? What's the best way to reach them? Who should actually do that communication? And what are the priorities? Who do you tell first? Who do you tell second? You know. So examples are, you want to get the word out to local elected officials. You want to get the word out to the media. You want to make sure WVU knows. You want to make sure the general public knows. How do you organize all that and get it done quickly and efficiently? So that's my summary of the source water protection planning process. The remainder of the presentation is going to be given by Tim Ball, the general manager of MUB. He's going to talk about the proposed construction.
Everything that Evan discussed really is about trying to manage the risk so that the probabilities of a contamination are reduced. And then he closed by talking about the contingency plan for how do we respond if an event happens despite those efforts. And so that's where I pick up here. The major difference between Morgantown and Charleston, and by the way, I'll just be frank with you, our unofficial slogan at MUB has become, we don't want to be Charleston. I mean, the experience that they had was terrible. And I would hate for our community and our staff to go through that. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that that does not happen here. But let's be real, the chance is there. All we can do is manage that risk and reduce it. The chief advantage that we have, that differentiates us from Charleston, is we have that Coben Creek Reservoir. We have a second source of water. Okay? Charleston didn't. It's all or nothing for Charleston. It's Elk Creek or nothing. We've got a choice. And we can and do frequently close our Mon River intake and switch over to our Coben Creek intake when water quality conditions require us to do so. So, to get to the bottom line, I'm setting you up for, we need a new, much larger reservoir. The existing reservoir was built in 1956. Its original volume was 56 million gallons. And at that time, the average daily usage of the Morgantown water customers was about 3 million gallons a day. So that meant that reservoir then, in 1956, had about 19 days of storage. Okay? Today, its useful volume has been reduced to 38 million gallons. We've lost about 18 million gallons due to sedimentation. Just soils, slowly over time, washing into the reservoir, have filled it and reduced its useful volume to 38 million gallons. At the same time, our daily usage of water has increased to 11 million gallons a day. That's about 3.4 days of storage. Okay? So 19 useful days of storage has been reduced to 3.4. That's an uncomfortable margin of safety. And we do rely upon it frequently.
What was the volume of the Tibbs Run Reservoir?
I'm sorry, I don't know that number.
They're very, very small.
Yeah, I know it's less.
A lot less.
Right. The existing reservoir has served us well, but we simply outgrown it. So we're proposing a new reservoir, and really that new reservoir has been part of MUB's long-range plan since the 1950s. This property in the Coben Creek Valley was purchased in the 50s for the purpose of building the reservoir that I'm now describing to you and proposing to build next year. You've already seen an image showing where that reservoir is located. We're proposing that that reservoir should be about 370 million gallons, be a 60-foot tall dam impounding water at a depth of about 48 feet at the dam. And we're going to need some additional land upstream of our existing property in order to fit that size of reservoir in there. We looked at a number of alternatives. We first considered concrete versus earthen dam. All the cost numbers that we're showing you here are for the earthen dam only. Concrete would be roughly twice the cost. That pretty much knocked concrete out of consideration from the beginning. So earthen dam is really the only economical alternative for us. We've looked at them at 3 basic sizes and really other sizes in between. And this slide really demonstrates economy of scale. Just like when we buy toilet paper at Sam's, the more you buy, the cheaper it gets. Okay, and the volume in the reservoir is much the same. If we built the smallest reservoir volume, only a 40-foot tall one, 117 million gallons, that cost would be roughly $17 million for a unit price of about 14 cents per gallon. What we're proposing is the bottom of the 370 million gallon reservoir for about $4 million more, $20.6 million. Notice the cost per gallon is less than half of the smallest option, only 6 cents per gallon. The main thing to look at are these days of storage. And I've given you 2 columns, one at 11 million gallons a day and one at 16 million gallons a day. 11 million gallons a day is our current rate of use. All right? So this 370 million gallon reservoir today will provide 33.6 days of storage. Now that's a comfortable margin of safety compared to the current 3.4. We do have projections that say that our community's demand for water within about the next 30 years or so is probably going to increase to 16 million gallons a day. So that's the long range plan. And if so, that 370 million gallons will then serve 23 days of storage. Recognize that there's one other improvement that we need to make to the water system. The secondary reservoir, it really provides reliability to the water system. It gives us another option to go to if for some reason the river's not available to us. So that improves the reliability of our water supply. But if we don't have power, then we can't make water regardless of what source is available to us. So in order to have true reliability at the water plant, we need an auxiliary power supply. Our plan over the years has been that we have 2 independent feeds from the power company to power the water treatment plant. Those feeds exist, and they have to be manually switched. In other words, if there's a loss of power from one circuit, we have to call the power company. They dispatch a crew and manually switch over to the second feed. We've seen over years that their response time has slowed, so it takes longer now than it used to for that crew to be dispatched. We've also seen that the frequency for which that's necessary has increased. We'd feel much, and our backup plan to that has always been that we would rent generators. In the event that there was a total failure of the power grid, we would rent generators in order to drive the plant. We made arrangements in advance with suppliers in the Pittsburgh area. They guaranteed us they could have generators here in 6 hours and running in 6 hours. That was our backup plan to the backup plan. The derecho of June 2012 rewrote all those assumptions. We realized then that our assumption that rental generators from the Pittsburgh market was not a reasonable assumption. That under the conditions in which they'd be necessary, we'd be just another beggar in a long line of people, more people needing generators than the market could provide. And so that experience rang our bell and told us rental is not an option. That's when we committed to providing a generator at the water plant as the backup to the backup system. All right, so my proposal to you is that for true reliability for the entire ability to produce and deliver water, we need a backup generator as well. We also have some challenges in the wastewater system. So I'm switching now to the wastewater plant. Our current wastewater plant has a capacity of 12 million gallons a day. In 2014,
our average usage was 11.1 million gallons a day at that plant. That's pretty close to the capacity. That's an uncomfortable combination. In 2011, the average usage for the entire year was actually 11.7 million gallons a day. It was affected by rainfall. 2011 was an exceptionally wet year, 65 inches of rain compared to the normal 44. Okay? 11.7 million gallons a day for the annual average against a capacity of 12. Not good. Okay? So we need more capacity. We need that additional capacity for future growth so our community can continue to grow. But that's actually a secondary reason for the capacity. We need the added capacity more for regulatory compliance. We are a CSO system. That's combined sewer outfalls. And this is a very simple graphic that shows that large parts of our system are designed and built so that stormwater and sanitary sewage are intentionally delivered to the same system and then conveyed to the wastewater plant. That works fine in dry weather conditions. But in wet weather conditions, when it rains, the little red arrow is the rain, the capacity of the system is overcome and those excess flows are discharged to the nearest receiving stream, either the Mon River or Deckers Creek. Okay? Now, I would never suggest to you that that's the way these systems ought to be designed and built. Nobody does that today. But 100 years ago, that's how systems were commonly designed. That's our reality. That's what we have. Okay? There's a federal policy that says that these CSO overflows have to be significantly reduced. Well, one way to do that would be to separate the systems. In other words, literally go out and build a new parallel system, probably leave the old one in place for the stormwater and sanitary sewer for the new one. $300 million if we were to do that. Okay? Not really feasible for our community. We've determined that the most economically effective and the most environmentally effective approach is for us to increase our treatment plant capacity, increase our conveyance capacity, so that we deliver these combined flows to the treatment plant and treat as much as we can there. We'll still have to overflow excesses, but those overflows will be significantly less often and significantly lower in total volume. So, what we're proposing to do, the upper is an aerial photo of the existing plant. These blue units here, if you actually walk by on the rail trail, they look like little Quonset huts. Those are called RBCs. It's a biological treatment process. They are antiquated, they're obsolete, they're poor in terms of their overall effectiveness. They turned out to be a poor treatment system. And they make up about 4 million gallons of our 12 million gallons per day capacity. So we need to get rid of it. Plus the other problem we have is that we're severely constrained in space. We have very little available space at our plant to work with. So we need to remove this 4 million gallons a day of capacity and replace it with 12 million gallons a day of MBR, membrane bioreactors, which are essentially technologically advanced activated sludge, biological units that use technology in order to squeeze more treatment into a smaller footprint. Okay? So that's the plan. In terms of dollars spent and the purpose for which it's needed, the compliance with the CSO, the federal CSO policy, reducing those combined sewer overflows and increasing plant capacity in order to achieve that, that is the primary reason that this new plant capacity is needed. The second reason is to replace this obsolete equipment. We're literally going to salvage yards to get replacement parts for these RBCs. They're easily 5 years beyond their true useful life. The third purpose for added capacity is to accommodate our growing community. And I wanted to emphasize that point because it is the third. And in terms of the total price tag, it probably makes up less than a third of the total cost of the project, and that is to accommodate the future, the growing community aspect. Because I'm concerned that if I didn't make that clarification, people might think that, well, we're simply doing this in order to grow, and we're going to blame this on community growth and sprawl. And regardless of what you think about community growth and sprawl, the reason I'm dwelling on this is that that's not the driver that makes this capacity necessary. It's CSO, federal CSO reduction policy that really drives that need. One other wastewater system upgrade, about $5 million that we need to do, is to replace a sanitary sewer that runs in the Crepes Park area. It runs from Crepes Park down to actually Brewer Street in Upper Star City, right behind the old Shoney's on Mon Boulevard. So we need to replace that interceptor. It's exposed in the creek. It's in very poor physical condition. It was built in the Roosevelt WPA days. What's it going to cost? $31 million for the water system improvements, $90 million for the sewer system improvements. Not inexpensive, but affordable for our community. Here's a graph of current water and sewer rates throughout the state. I'm going to pick up really quickly here. Again, we'll come back to this if you want to discuss it. The average combined water sewer bill around the state right now is $69 a month. Our current bill is about $34 a month. Here's what we're proposing. The current water bill will go from $15.48 to $20.59 a month. The current sewer bill will go from $18.64 to $34.95 a month. The combined water sewer bill will go from $34 a month to $55 a month. So bottom line, $21 a month increase is what we're proposing for all of these improvements that I just described. This is how that bar chart would look with those proposed increases. I'll actually show you two versions of this. This one includes the increase that the West Virginia American Water Company has proposed for its customers throughout the state, primarily the Kanawha Valley. Under those, and their proposed increase is about 28%. That average bill for combined water and sewer is about $73 a month. Ours will be $55 a month. So we're just about $18 a month less than the state average, even with our proposed increase. Our relative rank is really shown twice here. Here's our current bill, the lowest among these 25. With our increase, our rank switches to this, sixth lowest out of 25. So yes, it's a significant increase that we're asking the community for, but our bill still remains a bargain compared to most any other comparable place around the state in an affordable amount. And if you reject whether that we should include the West Virginia American increase for comparison, this slide removes it. Right, so we're back to $69 a month as the average bill around the state, ignoring West Virginia American's proposed increase. Our proposed bill is still $55 a month, and the difference is, what is it, about $14 a month. This compares us to PSDs, which are not municipally operated. I'll go ahead and skip through that, and I'll just stop at this point.
To have a broader discussion. And Pam, who organized this on behalf of the Green Team, is very interested in not just having us present information, but thinking about ways that people can get involved in water issues. We have a few suggestions here just to get the discussion rolling, but then after that, this is really our last slide. We could open it up, and I'm happy to take notes on the easel here. So the first few bullets here have to do with some of the deficiencies that we see in the state law that requires source water protection planning, and things that could be changed at the state level to make our job easier as a water utility and a consultant. First is that Senate Bill 373 set up the Public Water Supply System Study Commission, which is charged with making recommendations on how to do a better job at the state level. And that commission made recommendations before the last legislative session that were largely ignored. And the commission is making recommendations now, and we feel like if the public were engaged in that process, talking to the legislature, supporting the commission's recommendations, that could make a difference. The second is, in order for utilities like MUB to do a good job in minimizing the risk, they need to know what substances are at these facilities, what substances are being transported by rail. They need certain information to be disclosed. And at this point, we have a lot of the information we need, but some of it's still hard to get. So we feel like the public can be involved in that. The third is the confidentiality restrictions that I referenced a couple times. There's some language in Senate Bill 423 that is a little bit vague about what's allowed to be disclosed to the public and what's not, and we feel like that needs to be, at the very least, clarified, hopefully relaxed a little bit. The more that the public is knowledgeable about these, the more protection we feel like we can have for the water. The fourth is that there's an effort to propose a bill that would provide tax credits for land preservation, and particularly that those tax credits might help to preserve land up above drinking water intakes. And that could be something really good for the state, both in terms of protecting water quality and protecting land. And then finally, I just wanted to remind you about the new online app that I gave you the URL for a little while ago. Please go on there, look around. There's an email address there for people to provide input. So we're interested in ongoing input. This is an ongoing source water protection program at MUB. And finally, here's contact information for Greg, who presented earlier at MUB, and for Kendra at Downstream, who has been here as well. Feel free to contact Greg or Kendra.
About 2 years ago, MUB recommended to City Council, and City Council agreed and enacted an ordinance that changed the criteria for board members on the MUB board. So that now, formerly, before that change, you had to be a Morgantown resident to serve on the MUB board. But about 50% of our customer base is outside of the city, and so 50% of our customers were ineligible to serve on our board. And so recognizing that and the trend that you're referring to, we recommended and council did make a change in the criteria that now allows up to 2 members of our 5-member board to be made up of non-residents of the city. They still need to be MUB customers, but they may be residents, non-residents of the city. Right now, one of those positions is held in that manner. Mr. Bill Rice from Bakers Ridge Road is a non-resident and a MUB board member. One other position can be filled. It's not mandatory. It's permissive, but one other position could be filled.
I'm going to add one last thing, and that is that the reason it's important to have maybe an authority that represents the entire county, at some point, the resources that you're going to need are going to be far greater, especially if your balance sheet becomes more problematic. It's going to be beyond the means of the city. It's going to be something that's greater than that, and that's why you have to have eventually a representation for the whole county.
I agree completely. And in order to get there, we'll also need enabling state legislation that will authorize the creation of the type of utility that you're describing.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to leave for a minute, but I missed this. But with the concentration of student population in town now, the likelihood for like massive influxes of sewage going down the pipes, I haven't seen any construction along the river to deal with that. Is that an issue?
Actually, we did in 2010 to 2012, we did a major piping upgrade along the river. And so we already have made that step in advance of increasing our conveyance capacity along the river so that we are now prepared to deliver that additional flow to the wastewater plant, but we have to upgrade the plant before we can actually do that. So we've taken that step, and the plant expansion is the next progression in that plant.
I'm just curious if the university officials, those who are in charge of enrollment goals, do they get together with folks like you to make sure that those goals match up with our needs and infrastructure and just that they're sound goals in that sense?
We've compared notes with the university. I won't say that we meet annually or anything of that nature, but we're aware of their student projections. We've taken that into account in our own projections. Very pleased with the turnout tonight. This is what we want. We've dedicated ourselves to trying to inform the public completely, presenting ourselves to answer any questions. Whatever you want to ask, we'll try to answer. And if you have continued interest, there's 4 more meetings there, and we encourage you to please show up at those. Rich does.
I'm getting tired.